What would you do if you found an enemy dying at your gate? Not just any enemy, but someone your neighbors call savage. One whose people have taken lives, burned homesteads, and vanished into the hills without a trace. Would you help or walk away? This is the story of a rancher who chose compassion over fear. A single act of kindness done in silence at dusk. And by dawn, his fence posts were lit, not in flame, but in respect. If you like to hear interesting tales like this, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Stay with us till the end, because this story starts with water, but ends with fire, the kind that changes everything, that fateful day. Dust clung to the sky like a warning that wouldn't settle. It was early evening when Eli Cutter spotted the figure slumped against the edge of his property, just beyond the southern fence line. At first, he thought it was a wounded deer. Something crawled out from the brush, half dead, half praying for peace. But the closer he rode, the more the shape began to look like a man. And not just any man. This one wore paint. Cutter stopped. A good 30 yards out. He didn't move fast. Nobody with sense did, not out here. The Comanche was laid out on his side, chest rising in short, shallow bursts. His face was bloodied, cracked from heat. The ground beneath him was dark with sweat and dust, and his eyes, sharp, amber-colored, flicked up at Cutter with a mix of pain and pride. No fear, just defiance, even on the edge of death. Eli didn't speak, not at first. He just dismounted, slowly removed his canteen from the saddlebag, and took a few steps forward, holding it where the man could see. The Comanche didn't reach for it. He didn't move at all. "I reckon you don't speak much English," Eli said softly, more to the wind than to the man. "And I sure as hell don't speak Comanche. But thirsty's thirsty." He set the canteen down between them and stepped back. The Comanche stared for a moment. Then, with the last shreds of strength, he pulled himself up just enough to grab it, tilted it to his lips, and drank, not in gulps, but in slow measured swallows, like he knew it might be the last water he ever tasted. When he finished, he dropped the canteen back to the dirt and lay flat again. One hand splayed across his chest, the other resting limp at his side. His breathing evened out a little. Not fixed, just delayed. Eli studied him. Mid-20s maybe. Slim, but built like someone who could run 30 miles without a saddle. Blood on his shirt, maybe a bullet wound in the side. Hard to tell in the fading light. "You got folks coming for you?" Eli asked. No answer. Just those amber eyes, still watching. Eli thought about leaving him there. Plenty would have. This was Comanche country, and helping the wrong man could mean painting a target on your own barn door. But something about the Vaje silence, the dignity of it, wouldn't let him walk away. So he did what his father once told him was the hardest thing a man could do on the frontier. He turned his back, he walked away, and then he came back. With a blanket. The cabin was no palace, just one room, a cot, and a hearth with a coffee pot that hadn't seen fire since Tuesday. Eli dragged a water basin outside, rinsed the worst of the blood and dirt from the man's side, and left the rest to the quiet. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't anything more than a rancher who'd been on his own since 20-3. By nightfall, the Comanche was wrapped in wool and resting beneath Eli's small lean-to, not inside the house, but sheltered enough to keep him alive through the night. The wound didn't look fresh, which was a mercy, probably a grazing shot. The kind that hurts bad but leaves you time to make peace. Eli didn't sleep. He stayed on the porch, rifle across his lap, eyes on the ridgeline. Not because he expected trouble, but because he knew the land didn't care who you helped. It could still turn on you the minute you let your guard down. The coyotes howled after midnight. The wind picked up around 3, but otherwise it was quiet. Unsettlingly quiet. At first light, Eli stepped off the porch to check on his unexpected guest. The blanket was folded. The Comanche was gone. No blood trail, no footprints in the dust. Just gone, like a ghost. Eli stood there for a long moment, one hand on his belt buckle, brow furrowed beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't call out. He didn't go looking. That wasn't how things worked out here. If the man lived, he'd move like the wind, and if he didn't, well, Eli had given him a softer place to die than the scrub. He went about his chores that morning like always, fed the horses, checked the back gate, walked the fence line. It wasn't until he reached the north post, the last one before the quai de fort, the last one before the tens line, that it walked the fence line. It wasn't until he reached the north post, the last one before the pond gate, walked the back gate, walked the fence line. It walked the back gate. Pasture opens wide, that he saw it. A torch, not lit, just mounted there, upright, wedged into the dirt next to the post like it had grown from the ground. And then he saw the next one, 10 yards away, and another after that. All up and down his fence line, every 20 paces, 50 torches. Each one burned low and clean, smoldering without smoke, flames steady despite the morning wind. Eli froze, not out of fear, out of understanding. Because torches like that didn't mean a threat. They meant a vow. The Comanche hadn't just walked away, he had returned. And not alone. This was the start of something no rancher in that valley had ever seen. But it wasn't an act of revenge. It was something else entirely, something older. And the meaning behind those burning torches would echo across the plains before sundown. Eli didn't move for a while. He stood at the fence line, hat tilted back, watching the flames flicker one by one across the edge of his property like sentinels. There was no smoke, no hoofprints, no sign of who lit them or when. The ground was undisturbed, as if the riders had passed through like spirits, silent, unseen, but not unannounced. The torches burned low and slow, a kind of ceremonial fire, not meant to destroy, but to declare. Eli had heard stories, mostly from old-timers who talked too much when the bottle got low. Stories about the Comanche lighting fence posts not in threat, but in honor. It was rare, unspoken, usually reserved for warriors or elders who'd shown mercy where none was expected. Still, stories were just that, stories, until the fire danced right in front of you. He walked the entire line that morning, from north edge to south, counting every single torch, 50 in total, evenly spaced, perfectly placed. Not one had fallen over, and the flames never wavered. He didn't touch them, didn't try to move them. It didn't feel right. When he made it back to the porch, he set his rifle down by the door and poured himself a cup of strong coffee. He didn't drink it right away, just sat there with the tin cup in hand, letting the heat warm his palms. His dog, Boone, lay nearby, ears perked and alert but calm. Animals know things before men do, and Boone hadn't barked once. By noon, the neighbors had noticed. It started with Dusty Markham, who rode up from the east, reins tight in one hand and his brow furrowed like he'd tasted something sour. Dusty was a good man, mostly, ran a modest spread with his brothers, but like a lot of ranchers in those parts, he didn't have much patience for what he didn't understand. "You see what's on your line?" he called out as he approached, already dismounted and walking toward the porch like he expected Eli to hand him answers. "I saw," Eli replied evenly. Dusty leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed. "That's Comanche work. Everyone knows it. Figured as much. And you're just sitting here? What do you reckon I ought to be doing?" Dusty squinted, confused at the calm. "I dunno. Callin' the marshal? Rounding up some help? I mean, that many torches. That's a message." Eli finally sipped his coffee. "It is." Dusty waited, impatient, as if Eli might explain further. But when nothing came, he straightened up and huffed. "You know what they say, don't you? About lightin' fence posts? I've heard the stories. That it's a warning." Eli shook his head slowly. "No, that ain't what it means." Dusty tilted his head. "Then what does it mean?" Eli set his cup down. "It means they saw something they didn't expect, and they honored it. That's all." Dusty didn't look convinced. He scratched at his chin, then gave Boone a wary glance. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure enough to not go looking for a fight that ain't been offered." There was silence for a beat too long. Finally, Dusty nodded, more out of obligation. "Then agreement. Well, just keep your rifle close, Cutter. Never know what kind of strings get pulled when you offer kindness to the wrong soul." Eli watched him mount up and ride off, dust trailing behind like a whisper of old fear. That evening, the sun dropped low over the plains, casting long shadows from each burning post. The flames hadn't dimmed. If anything, they burned brighter with the cooling air. Boone kept watch, but never barked. Not once. As Eli sat on the porch sharpening a blade, he thought about the man from the night before, the Comanche with blood on his shirt and a look in his eye that didn't beg for anything. He hadn't spoken, hadn't thanked him, hadn't made any promise, and yet this had come. Honor. That was the word that kept surfacing in Eli's mind. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but honor, a kind of recognition that didn't need handshakes or speeches. Just quiet fire and space. After dark, a second visitor came. This one unexpected. The marshal. Not in uniform, not on duty, just John Bales, riding in slow and unarmed, lantern hanging from the saddle horn. He nodded once at Eli as he approached. "Evenin', Cutter." "Marshal." Bales stepped off and looked at the line of fire cutting through the field like a trail of stars. "You know what this means?" "I think so." "You helped one of theirs." Eli didn't flinch. "Gave him water, that's all." Bales studied the flames. "It ain't nothin' what you did. They don't do this for nothin'. These folks," he gestured toward the open plains, "they don't forget a thing. Not a kindness, not a cruelty. You gave that man more than water. I didn't do it for a reward." "I know. That's why it matters." They stood there for a long time, watching the torches flicker in the stillness. You worried someone's gonna misread this? Bales finally asked. Eli sighed. They already have. Dusty been by. First thing this morning. The marshal gave a half-smile. That boy jumps at his own echo. Still carries a loaded shotgun when he checks his mail. They shared. A soft chuckle, and for a moment, the tension that hung over the land, the kind that came with years of fear, half-truths. And stories passed down with bias baked in, lifted. Double quotes, just keep your head low. Bales said at last, and your gate's open. This ain't a threat, it's a bridge, rare thing that. With that, he tipped his hat and rode back into the dark. The torches burned for 2 more nights. Then, just before dawn on the 3rd morning, one by one, they went out. Not all at once, not in wind or rain, but carefully, intentionally, like someone had walked the line and pinched each flame between calloused fingers, leaving nothing but charred wood and scorched earth in their place. Eli knew they'd come again, not with fire, not for violence, but this time something far deeper and meaningful, and when they did, he'd be ready, not with his rifle, but with a second canteen. The torches had burned themselves out, but the memory of them lingered. Even days after the last flame had faded, Eli Cutter's land held a different kind of stillness, not quiet in the way open country often is, but contemplative like the ding. Ground itself remembered what had passed. When Eli rode his fence line now, it wasn't to look for broken wire or stray cattle. He was looking for something he couldn't quite name, some trace of the riders, some subtle sign of their return. Though he knew better than to expect one, nothing came. There were no hoofprints, no feathers, no tokens left behind. Only the blackened torches, still planted firmly in the earth like sentries long finished with their duty. Eli didn't remove them. He figured that wasn't his decision to make. If they were meant to be taken, someone else would do it. Until then, they stayed right where they were. The days passed slowly, but word moved fast. By the end of the week, folks from 3 counties had heard about the torches, and the Comanche rider Eli had helped. Some wanted the details. Others wanted to know if it meant more were coming. Most didn't know what to believe, only that something had happened out at Cutter's land, and it had involved Comanche fire and a rancher who wasn't known for dramatics. The stories grew legs, as stories do. Some said Eli had saved a Comanche war chief from the brink of death. Others whispered that he'd made a pact with them, trading safety for silence. The truth, that he gave water to a dying man without asking for anything in return, wasn't flashy enough to catch on. Still, Eli said nothing to correct them. He figured people would believe what they needed to. He had his truth, and that was enough. Even so, the attention brought consequences. Supplies took longer to arrive. The usual deliveries of feed and tools came with fewer words, fewer smiles. A couple of ranchers who once stopped by every few weeks to share coffee or trade fence work hadn't shown up since. The general store clerk in town didn't exactly overcharge him, but the measure of friendliness that used to come with every transaction had cooled considerably. Eli noticed it, of course, but he didn't let it change how he moved through the world. The same way he'd helped the Comanche without waiting to be seen, he now bore the distance of others without trying to fix it. It was Boone who first caught the scent. Nearly 10 days after the fires went out, They were walking the northern trail. Near the creek bed, when the dog froze, tail stiff, ears pointed toward the thicket, Eli stopped, followed the dog's gaze, and waited. Nothing stirred, but Boone didn't move for a full minute. Eventually, he looked up at Eli, almost asking for direction. Eli gave a slight nod, and Boone eased forward. That night, Eli left a basin of water on the porch steps. He didn't know why, call it a hunch, or maybe just habit. The next morning, it was empty. No tracks, no signs of spillage, no wind that might have tipped it. Just gone. 3 days later, something changed again. A small bundle was left at the gate, wrapped in deerskin and tied with sinew, no larger than a loaf of bread. Boone barked once, then sniffed it with no sign of distress. Inside was a neatly folded piece of buffalo hide, marked with patterns Eli didn't recognize, and beneath that a bundle of sage, 2 smooth river stones, and a single eagle feather. Eli stood there at the gate for a long time, turning the items over gently in his hands. He didn't pretend to understand the full meaning of it, but it felt deliberate, a response, perhaps, or an offering. He didn't show the bundle to anyone. He didn't take it into town or ask around for interpretation. He simply brought it inside, set it on the table, and placed a clean cloth over it. What mattered to him wasn't the meaning. It was the intent. Meanwhile, the mood in town was shifting again. What had started as suspicion was curdling into something meaner. At the saloon, someone made a loud joke about Cutter's new Comanche protection plan, and though Eli wasn't there to hear it, the words traveled. A ranch hand from downriver said someone had carved a crude arrowhead symbol into the side of Cutter's nameplate on the co-op board. Nobody admitted to it, but everyone saw it. Still, Eli said nothing. He rode into town when needed, kept his head down, and went back to his land as soon as the job was done. It wasn't until a few days later that everything shifted again, and this time, the change didn't come quietly. A wildfire had sparked. Overnight in the western hills, pushed by a hard wind and fed by dry brush. It wasn't uncommon, but it was fast, and within hours it had jumped the old creek line and was headed toward Dusty Markham's property. By the time the town caught word, it was merely too late. Eli heard about it from a passing rider just after dawn. He didn't hesitate. He loaded up a wagon with extra water drums, saddled his fastest mare, and headed west with Boone trailing behind. He didn't expect a warm welcome, but that didn't matter. Fire didn't check for grudges. When he arrived at the Markham place, the hills behind the barn were already glowing orange. Dusty and his brothers were hauling buckets from the well, but it was clear they were losing ground. The back fence was burning, and the horses were restless. Eli didn't ask permission. He unhitched the water drums, started forming a bucket line, and shouted instructions like it was his own land on the line. Some of the ranch hands looked confused. Dusty hesitated for a beat, then nodded and joined in. In a crisis, common sense still held some sway. The fire reached the edge of the barn, but didn't take it. Between the extra water and the wind dying down just enough, they managed to slow the blaze, then stop it altogether by early afternoon. No lives were lost. A few fences burned, a section of the corral was scorched, but the livestock were safe. When it was over, Dusty approached Eli, covered in soot, face streaked with ash and sweat. He didn't say thank you, not directly. He just looked Eli in the eye and said, "You didn't have to come." Eli shrugged. "Didn't seem right." "To stay home," Dusty nodded. A pause passed between them, and maybe something else with it. Understanding. Or maybe just exhaustion. That night, Eli returned home as the sky turned purple with twilight. As he reached his property line, Boone barked once, then stopped. There, planted right in the center of his gate, was a new torch. This one wasn't burning, but it was bound in fresh cloth, marked with red dye, and beside it lay a small circle of stones, carefully placed. Another message, another step. And this time, maybe, a bridge was being built from both sides. The torch at the gate stood, untouched for 3 days. Eli passed by it each morning and again before dusk. He didn't move it, didn't touch the stones at its base, and made no attempt to interpret its markings. He didn't feel the need. The message wasn't something he could translate into words. Anyway, it was something you felt more than understood. What mattered was that it was there. It meant someone had come again. Not out of obligation, but out of choice, and left. A sign of respect in plain view. A symbol placed not under the cover of night, but at the front of his land, where neighbors might see it and draw their own conclusions. He'd expected whispers. Maybe another visit from the marshal. Maybe even some fresh cold shoulders in town, but none came. Instead, something quieter unfolded. It began with Dusty Markham riding up again, this time without his usual tension. He came near sundown, sat on the edge of the porch steps while Boone lay nearby, and passed Eli a small bundle wrapped in canvas. "Barbed wire," Dusty said simply. "Got extra after patching the back slope. Figured you might need some soon." Eli took the bundle without fuss, gave a nod of thanks, and poured them both coffee without another word. They drank it slowly, watching the sky shift to violet, and said little else. That was the first sign. The second came a few days later when Hannah Thompson, the postmaster's widow, left 2 pies on his porch, 1 apple and 1 peach. No note. Just cloth napkins tucked underneath and a small twist of sage on top. And then, slowly, others followed. Neighbors who had kept their distance began waving again from across fence lines. A pair of ranch hands offered to help dig a new well trench, without asking for pay. Even the general store clerk began to soften, asking questions about Boone instead of glancing away while bagging flour and beans. It was never spoken out loud. Not really. But something had changed. Eli hadn't tried to earn it. He hadn't made speeches or told his side of the story. All he'd done was keep showing up, the way he always had. The way folks used to admire before fear taught them to watch their backs harder than they watched their neighbors. That fall, the rains came early, and the hillsides greened quicker than usual. The fire scars on the western ranches softened with fresh grass, and the creek near Eli's cabin ran stronger than it had in 3 years. With it came the kind of labor that didn't ask questions, long days fixing fences, pulling calves, setting irrigation channels straight. The work didn't care who lit your posts. It just asked for your hands. But one morning, something happened that didn't feel like work at all. It was just before dawn. The sky still streaked with the kind of soft lavender light that barely spills across the land. Eli had been up early, feeding the horses when Boone perked up, ears alert, tail still. Eli followed his gaze toward the far ridge, where the land rolled into brush and narrow pine stands. There, standing against the skyline, were 3 riders, quiet, unmoving. They didn't wave, didn't signal, just sat still for a long while, silhouettes against the brightening horizon. Eli stood just outside the barn, arms crossed loosely over his chest, waiting without expectation, and then one of the riders lifted an arm, slowly, and raised a single hand to the sky. A gesture not of threat, but acknowledgment. Respect. Eli lifted his hand in return, no more, no less. A minute passed. Then they turned as one, horses pivoting in practiced unison, and rode back over the ridge. He didn't see them again after that, but he didn't need to. They had come not to repay a debt, not to issue warning or ask favor, but simply to be seen and to show that they saw him too, as equals. As men. And in a world that had long drawn lines in the dust between us and them, that meant more than any torch or token. Later that day, Eli rode to town. It wasn't a remarkable trip. Supplies, a stop at the blacksmith, a quiet beer at the saloon. But something was different. A few ranchers nodded. A younger man, one of the Markham boys, asked if Eli would be willing to show him how to reset a windmill blade. When there's time, he added quickly. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something better. Recognition. People were beginning to understand that standing firm in what's right doesn't always make you loud. Sometimes it just makes you steady enough for others to lean on when the wind changes direction. And out on the frontier, where memory is long and grudges linger, respect earned in silence is the kind that sticks. That winter, Eli kept the stones from the torch circle. He placed them in a neat row along the edge of the porch, not as decoration but as reminder of the fire, of the water, of the man who asked for neither but accepted both. He never told the full story to anyone, not because it was a secret, but because some stories aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be carried.